call this thing where you get this false sense of gratification, but because a black man is in office, everything's gonna be all right. No, everything's not gonna be all right.
So I know how unpopular it is to be seen as helping banks right now, especially when everyone is suffering in part from their bad decisions. I promise you, I get it.
The Obama deception. The truth strikes back. Get your copy of The Obama Deception today at INFOWARS.com or download it in super high quality at PRISONPLANET.tv. Welcome back. It's the second half of INFOWARS Nightly News. John Perkins, the economic hitman author, is going to be joining us coming up here in a few minutes, and we'll also look at some of the latest economic developments in Europe as the world is held hostage by the banksters. Turn over total sovereignty and what's left of your rights to us, or we'll give you a depression. And once you give us your liberties, we'll give you a depression anyways. That's what we've done to the rest of the world. But so what? We like you poor. That's coming up. But first, I wanted to get into, well, some news of the weird, to say the least. I've always wondered, reading in different history books from around the world, what would it be like to spontaneously combust? This has happened in public. It happened in ancient times. Asians wrote about it. The ancients in Latin America and Mesoamerica wrote about it. There's famous cases in ancient Europe and even modern England. And there's a new report out on this where the coroner has found that nothing else was damaged in the house, and that this gentleman reportedly spontaneously combusted and completely melted down. Sometimes they even burn holes in the floor. It's like the Wicked Witch or something, just explodes. First Irish case of death by spontaneous combustion. A man who burned to death in his home died as a result of spontaneous combustion, an Irish coroner has ruled. West Galway coroner, Dr. Syrian McLaughlin, said it was the first time in 25 years of investigating deaths that he had recorded such a verdict. It says Michael Faraday, 76, died at his home in Galloway last year, but it's now been confirmed. The death was attributed by some to spontaneous combustion occur when the living human body is burned without an apparent external source of ignition. I'll tell you what my dad thinks is going on. Well, first, typically, the police and fire investigators find burned corpses, but no burned furniture. My dad has pointed out that most lightning actually comes from the bottom up, from the ground up, and that it's an optical illusion that comes from the top down, because it tends to ionize and energize as it goes up. Some lightning does go from the atmosphere down, and that it's probably people with static electricity or other earth events. You've seen trees hit by lightning that explode and are all charred and black and catch on fire. I know I've seen a tree, big tree, struck by lightning and catch on fire and burn. That's probably what's happening here, is that, boom, lightning comes up, millions of volts, and you just explode. I don't know. Might be a good way to go. Certainly probably isn't very painful. In fact, from the eyewitnesses, you don't even have that much time to wonder why you're on fire. It's just boom, you explode and almost nothing is left. So there's my theory. I'm always called a conspiracy theorist. I very rarely theorize. Now, one other big news report here is they say particles found to break the speed of light. They claim at the Hadron Superconducting Super Collider there on the border in between France and Switzerland, that a team of scientists now last week have recorded subatomic particles traveling faster than light, a finding that could overturn one of Einstein's long-accepted fundamentals, laws of the universe. Yeah, Einstein was a smart guy, but he didn't invent atomic theory. Max Planck did. He expanded on it, and a lot of what Einstein has said has turned out to be true. And I certainly believe that, light is not the fastest thing out there. We were told for hundreds of years that the speed of sound was impossible to break. And of course, what happened with that. He's still living. His name's Chuck Yeager. And now they've got planes that go 4 or 5 times the speed of sound. My only issue is I don't believe a lot of what comes out of Hadron because they're so secretive. The stuff that comes out of the CERN superconducting super collider, the Hadron Collider. And so who knows? The point is, we're certainly not in Kansas anymore. And for all I know, it may be true. Just when scientists tell you global warming's real and ice caps have totally melted and sea levels are rising when they've actually dropped, and you get their internal emails that they're engaged in fraud, and now it's come out that the big CERN system has been caught covering up some global warming news. It's really frustrating. Okay, I wanted to hit a few final economic news stories before we go to John Perkins. The Daily Mail is reporting 6 weeks to save the euro. Chancellor's warning after another day of financial turmoil. George Osborne has savaged Eurozone leaders, failing to get a grip on their towering debts. Of course, these aren't their debts. They've signed on to the derivatives that have been created. And Merkel is also saying the problem is the fact that there's too many democratic institutions in Europe, and that they need to give up what's left of their national sovereignty to the private dictatorship. I want to go to a compilation of video clips from my film, Police State 4, The Rise of FEMA, from just a year and a half ago, with Al Gore, Herman von Rompuy, Gordon Brown, and others, admitting that the financial crisis of 2008 and 9 would be used to set up a global government, a private corporate global government. And now we're into round 2 of this, where they're holding Europe hostage, saying, give up what sovereignty you have left and what liberties you have left, or we will plunge you into economic destruction.
But it is the awareness itself that will drive the change. And one of the ways it will drive the change is through global governance and global agreements. But the many business leaders who have been present here are among those taking leadership in other ways.
Yet these problems can be overcome by a joint effort in and between our countries. 2009 is also the first year of global governance, with the establishment of the G20 in the middle of the financial crisis. The climate conference in Copenhagen is another step towards the global management of our planet.
This is collective action, people working together at their best. I think a new world order is emerging, and with it the foundations of a new and progressive era of international cooperation.
And then if I dare talk about it, they go, oh, shut up, Jones. You crazy nut. None of that exists. And if you talk about it, you're going to cause violence. Just give in to the New World Order, roll over to it, hand your guns in. And with more on the global economic crisis, we're joined by the best-selling author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman, as well as one of his latest books, Hoodwinked, John Perkins. John, great to have you back.
Good to be with you, Alex, again. Thank you.
I've been interviewing you, 5, 6 years since your first book came out, and you predicted much of what has now unfolded. We're seeing the very same private banking cartels telling the European Union now, transfer all of your existing rights and sovereignty to a new private financial order. And I see Bloomberg News admitting, yes, national sovereignty and democracy in Germany is the problem. We need bankers ruling everything, or we're going to have a global economic implosion. Is this by design, or does it even matter? Because at the end of the day, we are seeing a global banking dictatorship set up.
Oh, I don't think there's any question, Alex, that it's by design. The people at the top, what I call the corporatocracy, the people who run our biggest corporations around the world, they know what they're doing. They know what's going on here, and they want it to happen this way. It's by design. They're taking control. You know, we've moved from a time a few hundred years ago when religious organizations pretty much ran the world, to then governments running the world, and now we've moved to the next phase, which is the big corporations controlling the world financially and economically and politically. Nations don't mean much anymore. The corporations are really exercising their muscle right now.
They certainly are. Talk about some of the big power players from your perspective. And for viewers who may not know who you are, tell us a little bit about your experience that's unique to be able to make the assessment you've made today.
Well, my official title was chief economist at a major consulting firm in Boston, Massachusetts. This is back in the 70s. I was really an economic hitman. I arranged huge loans for countries that had resources that corporations coveted, from places like the World Bank and the private banking industry. Money never actually went to those countries. It went instead to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in those countries, like power plants and industrial parks, that benefited a few wealthy people in those countries, as well as our own corporations, but didn't help the majority of the people. Too poor to buy electricity, couldn't get jobs in industrial parks because they don't hire many people. And yet they, the people of the country, were left holding a huge debt they couldn't repay. So we go back at some point and say, hey, since you can't pay your debts, sell your oil to our oil companies real cheap, or your mineral resources, whatever. Open your markets to us. Let us build a military base on your soil. Vote with us on the next critical United Nations vote. And in the few cases where these leaders didn't go along with what we wanted them to, what we call the jackals went in. These are people that assassinate or overthrow governments. And because I couldn't bring Jaime Roldos, president of Ecuador, around, or Omar Torrijos of Panama, they were both assassinated in this process. It's a pretty insidious method, but it's a new way of forming empire, and it's turned out to be extremely successful, and it's bringing us all apart.
Well, if one thing is clear, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, the other big mega global banks are totally ruthless and really revel in oppression and destroying societies. And as you pointed out, they go in and build their own infrastructure that's taxpayer paid for. So the public pays for the services, but also pays for the investment. And then the country goes into impossible to pay off debts. I've seen numbers of Nigeria. They get $1 billion loan over the last 30 years, pay over $50 billion, and still owe tens of billions of dollars. And now this very structure is being used on the West, breaking down what we're seeing happen in Europe and here in the U.S. What is the end game of these big mega banks and corporations that have grown up around them?
It's total control. It's a new form of empire. It's an empire that isn't created primarily through the military, although the military is right there always to back up these corporations if they get into trouble. But it's this form of empire that's being built around debt and fear. And in a way, it dates back to the old feudal empires where you had these castles around the country side, and you had a few what we call the bourgeoisie, people that lived around the outsides of the castles. And they were kept there. They kept us having to give a huge percentage of their crops or whatever they did, blacksmiths, whatever their work they did, they had to donate it to the lord of the castle and his knights. Or they felt that they would be attacked by somebody from another castle. We're very much in that mentality today, except today the castle is the big corporations, and the lords are the CEOs of those corporations, and their knights are all the henchmen that work for them. Very, very similar situation. And yes, we're seeing it in the United States. We're seeing it in Europe. I'm on my way to Istanbul to speak at a major conference there of leaders from many Eastern European and Middle Eastern countries. They're experiencing it big time. And people are beginning to understand what's happening. That's why we're having these uprisings, what we call the Arab Spring, and many other parts of the world. We're seeing people begin to really get informed and demonstrate against this.
Zbigniew Brzezinski told the Council on Foreign Relations last year that for the first time in history, quote, all of humanity is awake and staring at the elite, not at their